I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you would like. The purpose of this channel is in regard to atheist and deconversion issues and the Bible, theology, politics, philosophy, anything else that comes up in relationship to those issues. Today is kind of a reaction to a few discussions in the comments section on my last video about how churches draw you in and use emotion to keep you. And I got a lot of good response from that. But one of the aspects of that was when I was talking about my Pentecostal church experiences, and they were talking about various Pentecostal experiences. I wanted to kind of address basically the 9 gifts of the Spirit that were supposedly in Pentecostal churches. And supposedly this was, you need to understand that in the Pentecostal church, they look at this as proof not only that God exists, but that God is really truly with them. The Assemblies of God logo has in it the words, all the gospel. The basic accusation of the Assemblies of God is all other churches are kind of incomplete. They won't say that they don't preach the truth, but they say they're incomplete because they don't have the gifts of the Spirit and the Holy baptism of the Holy Spirit and all that stuff in operation inside their midst. Looking back at it, I grew up in Pentecost, and so I grew up in a Pentecostal church. My parents took me every Sunday, but when I became a minister, it became even more interesting because I was never really a very good Pentecostal, because I was really always very skeptical of Pentecostal experiences. I could always equate them to something else. I suppose you might say that in an experiential way, this was the beginning of the end for my faith. I just didn't realize it at the time. I was always questioning these experiences, and one of the key teachings of the Assemblies of God was the 9 gifts of the Spirit as found in Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, written by Paul. And it's a list of 9 gifts. And I'm going to just kind of go through them briefly and how they were used in the service, but also what I think about them now. The first ones that I'm going to put into a couple is called Word of Wisdom and Word of Knowledge. Now, this wasn't necessarily an ecstatic experience like tongues and prophecy. It will be that I'll talk about in a minute. But it was more of a, how should I say it? You're having thoughts about things, and all of a sudden something comes into your brain that either has a knowledge aspect to it, where it's knowledge that you don't think that you would have come up with by yourself. The word of wisdom is then the way to use either that word of knowledge or knowledge already possessed by other means, that God is giving you directly the wisdom. Now, the real spiritual aspect of this to Pentecostals is the fact that this is coming directly from God. Probably one of the interesting things in Assemblies of God churches is a lot of the more passionate believers really think that they're hearing and experiencing God. So some of them often find themselves at odds with church leadership simply because they don't believe that the church leadership has actually heard from God. You should say that Assembly of God churches take their priesthood of all believers very, very seriously. And it's this experientialism where sometimes they think that they've heard what God is really saying or what God is really asking them to do. And word of wisdom and word of knowledge kind of couple with that. The other utterance type gifts that are more ecstatic are, of course, prophecy, tongues, and interpretation of tongues. I'm not going to get into the full doctrine of the difference between tongues and interpretation of tongues, other than to say that the Pentecostal viewpoint is prophecy is like direct word of God straight from the throne through a person's mouth onto the floor. You'll see this in Christian ministers of the more charismatic Pentecostal variety, where they stand up and say, I have a prophecy from God, or you have people claiming that they're hearing from God or speaking from God or giving prophecies. What's been truly hilarious of late is how many people that prophesied that Trump would win the election, and now they're trying to double down and triple down on their prophecy. They couldn't conclude. Even one guy admitted that he missed it, but he couldn't conclude that he was a false prophet. By Old Testament law, there's two characteristics of a false prophet. One, he teaches the people to disobey the commandments of the Lord, or he prophesies something and it doesn't come to pass. Those are your two characteristics of Old Testament prophecy, of the Old Testament saying this is how you tell a true and a false prophet. If you have a false prophecy that doesn't come to pass, you're a false prophet. Okay? And prophecy in the church didn't really function like a prediction of the future so much as an exhortation. I want my people to be more holy. I want my people to be more glowing, more whatever, more passionate about God. Often these prophecies in church, and I didn't hear one in my entire life that wasn't so general as to resemble an astrological horoscope. They were just really general. I love my people. God's going to come down and, touch my people and make them better. It was really general stuff that could be interpreted 100 million ways. And the real issue, though, for the psychology of the person uttering a prophecy from the floor was the simple idea that they believed very strongly that God was directly speaking through them. And it had to be an emotional high. In fact, every time I saw one of these utterance gifts, and whether tongues and interpretation or prophecy, I could always tell it was a very deep emotional experience for the person doing it. But like many have pointed out, these deep emotional experiences in church, they can be, as I pointed out in one window, they can be manipulated. You can be brought into an emotional high for that purpose. But you also can get so used to it that you trigger it yourself because it stimulates the same parts of the brain that are used for recreational drugs, they're used for alcohol, used for having a really good feeling because you had a good day, used when you have sex. It's the same center of the brain, the same pleasure centers of the brain that get stimulated by these spiritual ecstatic experiences. We've proven this in the lab, actually. And so it's kind of like, it stimulates the same part of the brain. So what's the difference between prophecy and tongues and interpretation? Well, in the tongues case, you have an ecstatic utterance in tongues. And then somebody else, and this is not like the normal glossolalia where everybody's just praying around the altar in tongues. This is a special message in tongues to the congregation as a sign that God is really speaking through people. And then the interpreter comes along and basically interprets that, and it functions much the same as a prophecy. Every interpretation of tongues had the same problem that I had with prophecy. It was general. It could apply to any church at any time, most of the time. It was very rare for it to get specific, and often when it did, it went horribly wrong because it never came to pass. Now, glossolalia, speaking in tongues, is a very interesting phenomenon, but it is not unique to Pentecostalism or Christianity. A lot of cultures, a lot of different religions have speaking in tongues as part of their rituals and stuff. It's not actually hard to learn how to do. I debated with myself whether or not to actually speak in tongues right now because I believe it's a learned behavior. And it's something that you can teach people simply by having everybody keep doing it. And as little children grow up, they hear this stuff and they get it explained to them. And then suddenly, for whatever reason, they figure out how to do it themselves, usually by mimicking or copying the adults. I can speak in tongues right now, and I don't really want to because I know for some people that's a real nasty trigger. And it's a trigger for me too, because I realize it's something I was manipulated into learning, and it doesn't really have any spiritual value. I can still do it, which is kind of interesting, seeing that I'm supposedly an atheist now, so I shouldn't be spirit-filled at all. The fact that anybody can learn how to do this, sound exactly like the Pentecostals and Charismatics, kind of tells you something about the spiritual gift, that it A, isn't all that special, and B, if anybody can do it, maybe divine spirituality just isn't necessary. So you have all those utterance gifts, and then you have the next one that I often had a lot of problems with when people said they had it. I think discernment of spirits was always an interesting one because the idea behind it is be able to tell the demons from the non-demons. And, it was just one of those things that people said they did. But what I often found that Pentecostals used it, I would rather call it the gift of suspicion. they would always be telling me about, I think that person has a spiritual problem in their life and God needs to get a hold of them a little bit more. You should really speak to them about that, Pastor. Or it would become, you really need to watch that new couple because I think they're up to something. You really shouldn't trust them, Pastor. I got it so negative all the time. It was never anything positive. They have a good heart. Occasionally it would come out. But the people that claim discernment of spirits were just basically making up spiritual states for the people in the congregation that they thought they saw, but they were claiming a spiritual gift. And I think it's that gossipy side of things, because you're not allowed to gossip in church, but you can have discernment of spirits to really know what's on their spiritual heart and what their actions really do. It's hilarious. It's funny now to me. But back then, I took it dead seriously. And I even at one time claimed that I had the gift of discernment of spirits. But now I kind of look at it, no, I was just a suspicious son of a bitch and kind of critical of people and critical of spiritual experiences. So I didn't trust everything in them. There was also healing. Now, divine healing has been around for a while, but as one of the spiritual gifts of the Spirit, I have now become probably more skeptical of divine healing than any of the other gifts of the Spirit and put most adamantly against it. Because one of the things I saw in the church constantly and continually was this notion that, we should come to God and get healed. We should pray. We should lay hands on people, anoint them, as James says, anoint them in oil. And then the prayer of the faith, done in faith, will save the sick. It's kind of an interesting concept to me because it's really scary. Because I put it now in the category of woo, where people are going, that they claim that crystals heal or any of this other bullshit. My problem with it now is that a lot of people in my church would claim God has healed me. I don't need to go to the doctor. I heard that a lot, and it was scary to hear because, quite frankly, I don't think the prayer actually healed them. It just gave them a really good feeling. And I would often hear 2 days later that they were in the hospital or they had gone to see the doctor or they had gone. And what now irritates me is when hospitals and doctors actually heal people and then they come back to church. I want to give glory to God for my healing. And, this spiritual gift was given to us. And some people claim a special divine link to heal. Some of the more famous ministers, of course, are like Benny Hinn and a few others. But the fact of the matter is most Pentecostal churches had somebody in the midst that claimed, I can pray for people and heal them. Now, that healing wasn't always physical. I even saw people get as sophisticated as, healing different types of mental illness or healing different types of physical ailments that was their medical healing specialty. And I found that hilarious too. Oh, so you're saying God only helps you pray for people and they get healed of depression. What a very dangerous viewpoint to have, that God can heal you and you don't need medicine. It happened a lot and it was scary. But also, once again, this emotional high of thinking that you're a person that's laying hands on people and they're getting better. Man, what a rush that must be. Probably stimulates those same pleasure centers. The other one that we have that's kind of like healing is miracles. Now, miracles are distinguished from healing in that it's more like the difference between Jesus healing the leper and Jesus, making water into wine. Jesus healing the leper is a gift of healing. Water into wine is more of a miracle. The idea of miracles of provision. A lot of times I would hear this, God gave us a miracle. We were running on fumes in our car and we just knew we had to make it. And we managed to make it the extra 20 miles before we got to the gas station. I heard that story at least 3 times. I heard, I prayed or went to the, door and all of a sudden there were 2 bags of groceries there, that weren't there before. The problem is with all of these miracles is there's a good naturalistic explanation for it. For one, back in the day, your cars could run on E for quite some time. It was actually a built-in feature in some cars so that people would say, I'm almost empty, but really they weren't going to be in a problem for another 20, 30 miles. The other thing that often I would see people that claim the gasoline miracle was pretty much that they changed the way they drove so they didn't hit the lead foot so hard. so they could get there. It was probably more their behavior and the way the cars were designed than any miracle. And as for all the other miracles of provision of having the groceries on the, if you tell people you're in need and you're hurting and you have prayer for them, somebody in the church is going to drop that off. People are compassionate for the most part. Even I don't discount Christians' ability to be compassionate when they want to be. But my point is this: miracles had nothing to do with it. They heard you had a need. They went and bought you some groceries and they gave it to you. You should thank them. Now, the last gift of the Spirit has caused more controversy among Pentecostals than anything else, and that's the gift of faith. Faith as a gift in Pentecostal charismatic center is distinguished from the regular everyday faith we have just to believe. In this kind of faith, it's the best description I ever got from it was faith beyond faith, where you believe in something that's absolutely impossible and it comes to pass. The problem I had with this gift, it was so ill-defined that a lot of people claim to have it. I have the gift of faith. I just believe and believe and believe no matter what happens. Maybe you've just been brainwashed into thinking that you need to keep believing and believing and believing no matter what happens. Maybe that's really what's going on. This is kind of something that I just, it was one of those gifts of the Spirit that I just didn't know what to do with. And it's probably all these interpretations of gifts of the Spirit and the experience of glossolalia as a general thing of being filled with the Spirit that I began to really question Pentecost, because I saw so much of it was naturalistic. I remember when there was a healing evangelist that came to my church when I was a youth, and I literally saw the guy. We had somebody in the church that, walked with a cane. I literally saw the guy pick up the cane from the person that had it, but pointed to the person in front of them to get up and walk up and down the aisle. And, the church was packed, so nobody really knew some of these people, but I saw that happen. I also noticed when we hit the 80s and 90s, when earpieces first started to appear, that a lot of these so-called prophets had them, and they all made us sign cards before we went into the service. That's strange. Well, why would you do that? Well, they were getting fed information through somebody else who was reading the cards. And everybody, what a man of God, what a mighty prophet. I'm like, no, it's complete and utter bullshit. And I used to see this stuff all the time, people that would make claims to having spiritual gifts, and it was just nothing. So why do people keep coming back to it? Everybody wants power over their circumstances, and Pentecostal people have a tendency to be more needy than most. They tend to be poor. The people that I had in the church most of the time were middle class, was the best I usually had, and they were usually my deacons. But it's just one of those things, when you really look at it, it's just not really real. It's emotional hype, an emotional hype of the worst type. Just for today, I think I'm going to skip the comment of the day because I've already gone a little bit longer than I intended with this one. But I felt it was important to talk about Pentecostal experience and other aspects of it. From a deconversion standpoint, I deconverted from this long before I deconverted from Christianity, because I just really didn't see the point. They're trying to uphold certain parts of the Bible is still true. But the real problem with that is when I could give an alternate explanation to every spiritual gift that had no spirituality required, you suddenly begin to realize that the whole thing might be a con game. I want to thank everybody for stopping by. I appreciate you coming by and listening to an ex-preacher turned atheist pontificate a little bit. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe, so please do that. Every little bit helps the channel. I also have a Facebook page. You can follow me there, and it's a good way to communicate with me a little bit more directly if that's what you want to do, though I can't guarantee that I'll answer every message. Thank you once again for your support. I appreciate it. Hopefully someday I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.